You mentioned her name.
Richenda.
Richenda.
Yes. It's when I first heard it, I thought it was an Italian name, but it is in fact a female equivalent of Richard. Yes, it's a common name among Quakers, and her ancestors had been Quakers, but her grandfather, Edward Reynolds Pease, was a very firm atheist, and left the Quaker fold. And Richenda's father also was a strong atheist and refused to enter a church.
What about Richenda herself? What was her?
I think she was an agnostic, as I am. Yes, a word that was invented by my grandfather.
What a lovely thought. So you were and still are an agnostic.
Yes.
So you cannot see either that one can prove or disprove the existence of God.
Yes.
Yeah.
In all frankness, I do think that religion and science are in many ways antithetical. I know there's endless argument about this, particularly by the many scientists who are religious. But the problem is that religion is something that depends on faith. And once a scientist starts depending on faith, he or she is finished as a scientist. You cannot believe that something is true in science without evidence. And you cannot study mystery which is of its very nature mysterious, and that's what religion is all about. It's filled with mysteries of its own making, designed to be insoluble. The nature of the Trinity, the indivisibility of the three parts of God, Father and Son. Are they the same thing or are they different? There's no answer to that question. You can debate it endlessly. Humankind spent 1,000 wasted years doing that. Science asks smaller, simpler questions, and most of all questions that can be answered. So I think it's actually antithetical to religion.
So they might say that heaven is different from earth because in heaven the environment is different. So maybe people are not tempted to commit sin in heaven. But then you can wonder why earth is not like that. Why we don't live in this kind of environment where we are not tempted to perform morally wrong actions.
But if you had to classify yourself as a believer, as an agnostic, as an atheist, and there might be other choices, where would you classify yourself?
I would classify myself as an agnostic. I mean, I don't think... in my view, you cannot know enough to know that there is nothing that you don't understand, and I think it is hubris to assert that there is nothing that is within our comprehension. But to sign up to a fully elaborated religious system of beliefs is something that I can't reach.
I mean, think about it. If God is an omnipotent, omniscient agent, he can do whatever he likes. Okay. So what sort of world would you expect him to create? What's the evidence that would show that one particular divine being has been at work rather than another? Well, it's the goodness, isn't it? That's the crucial thing. So the problem of evil shouldn't be called the problem of evil, it should be called the problem of the empirical evidence. The problem of the empirical evidence is that the world we see just doesn't match up to what you'd expect from a perfect God.
Anglican atheism is really I quite like the rituals of the Church of England, if I had to choose. I don't believe in God and all that, but and obviously I don't well, it was reinforced by reading Hegel, because the idea that this happens to be the religious culture that has been on this island, and I don't feel any strong urge to disrupt it more than, except when it behaves in a ridiculous way. So so I suppose agnostic is probably the...
I think this is an human creation. Because the other part of observing the variety of religious experiences that have arisen in this world out there is that they all take different formats. the natural ones, the ones that have... And that convinces me there is no God.
My mother was a very loving, warm person who I remember her getting extremely unhappy when I told her at the age of 13 I was an atheist. And but she was the core of the family. But in terms of kind of intellectual life, my father, in some ways, he was a highly intelligent man, and he did become quite successful in business. But he would also, I think, have quite liked the intellectual life as well. So there were books in the house, and my education was always greatly encouraged.
Science can never rule out the possibility that there was an all-powerful being, a God, if you will, that created the universe. You can never rule that out, but it's not a very satisfying explanation from the point of view of a scientist, because we want an explanation that really understands the nuts and bolts of how the universe began. You can ask any question and say, oh, God made it that way, right. And you can say that, but we have learned that if you look deeply, you can get more deep explanations, and we're hoping the deepest one will tell us how the universe began.
And is it possible, if you solve the question, you can then say, yes, here is how that all-powerful being created the universe? That would satisfy everybody, wouldn't it?
You could phrase it that way, and if that makes you happy, that is perfectly fine with me. But what I would say is, I don't know that you're going to need the all-powerful being. You can't rule it out, but we may have laws that, in and of themselves, may explain everything. It's possible.
Well, yes, he said, Martin Rees once when asked, said he was a non-believing Christian. And I thought, yeah, that's actually quite close to what I am. In other words, I understand and I accept the culture that we have has come out of Christianity, but just because I accept it and I go along with it and admire it actually, doesn't mean to say that I have to also believe in God.
Piety is doing what's pleasing to the gods. Doing good and being good. Surely what's most pleasing of all, then, is someone who does good because it is good, because she understands what the good is, and because she values it for itself, and not for the prizes it might bring. Atheists, if they commit themselves to justice, to peace, to the relief of suffering, can only be doing so out of love of the good. Atheists have the opportunity to practice perfect piety.
I'm not one who believes in the Bible. I find it very hard to see how people could believe in the Bible, but on the other hand, I'm somewhat, religious. I go to synagogue sometimes. I just, I'm more of what you would call an agnostic. But I see science as being separate and religious beliefs as being separate, and one doesn't prove the other.
I did, therefore, in that period, fully fast on one Day of Atonement at Cheltenham in that period when I was boarding. And that's the closest I've ever come to religious practice.
I want to ask, you don't then believe in any kind of afterlife or any consciousness, a God-like
consciousness?
No,
I can pull out. Well, I don't have in my Israeli purse because when I go abroad, I'm changing purses. But and typically I don't drive abroad. My Israeli purse contains a certificate from the Israeli organ transplantation organization that say that if I die or if any physician find my situation irreversible as far as death route, they can take all the organs, whatever they want, give it to whoever. I don't believe in anything that is beyond life. I believe in being born, and then there is one fact sure. Once we are born, we are going to die. That's the only fact that I believe in. But nevertheless, I'm a strong Jew, maybe a religious Jew. Jews will not accept it, what I'm saying now, but it's okay. I'm not preaching for acceptance of my own beliefs. Maybe they feel differently about God and about the services and the prayer and the obedience and the life. For me, no. It's a culture, but I feel extremely strong about what all this culture means.
I am Jewish, very much Jewish, but not Jewish in the synagogue way. It means culture to me. I was bemitzvahed by a wonderful man, Cantor Deutsch, who's known throughout Australia, and he bemitzvahed my children. And that was important. I liked the fact that they went back to Australia and were bemitzvahed by him.
I was brought up very right-wing politically and very agnostic. about religion, but very much interested in politics and religion.
And in our research, we have planted whole memories into the minds of people. We've made people believe that they did things that they didn't do. Complete memories. You choked on a small object. You were attacked by a vicious animal. You know, some whole very rich event happened to you when you were younger. So I know something about the malleability of memory, and it seems like we can do that in a short period of time. We can do that because we are bringing a seemingly credible source to bear on the subject. But out there in the world of religious beliefs, where you are soaked in a repetition of those beliefs, you're hearing them from lots of other people all around you are believing them, it's no wonder that you can indoctrinate people with these beliefs, even if they don't make very much sense.
Whereas I'm not a believer or a theist, I'm also not a militant atheist. And I think that debate leads into a range of different discursive and existential corners that I don't want to go to, and I never felt the need to go.
I know I've sort of always remained an agnostic and not an atheist. I'm not militant about it, but I've never seen any evidence for it, and if anything, being a historian has turned me the other way.
I do think this is strange. Politicians are more comfortable talking about religion and God than they are about science and numbers and facts. Now, that's odd. I mean, it's not that they can't talk about the former, but it's almost like they have to talk about the former, whereas talking about science is considered to be just, it's going to harm you. And I actually think that we've got to get past that if we're going to be able to make progress in some of the big issues we have today.
Yes, I did nearly die on a couple of occasions, or maybe three actually, in that decade of the 1990s, never having really been ill all my life. And one occasion was, I was very lucky to be alive, but I had a massive hemorrhage. I can say one thing that, before I answer you directly, I never turned to religion. I was really true to myself. I never, although knowing that I might very well die, I never actually felt, this is the moment I better get myself converted to Judaism properly, or something like that. And never actually crossed my mind. And I've always thought, well, I hope that if on my deathbed I do something funny like that, everyone will understand that it doesn't mean anything at all, that it's just absolutely right.
Back since the age of about 15 or 16, been an agnostic, and in later years I converted from being an agnostic into being a somewhat dogmatic atheist.
Did you? Oh, when did that happen?
I think that my personal attitudes to religion actually were hardened by doing the Benares study. A number of the ideas that I discerned as underlying a lot of what people were saying and were going on about, I mean, really rather deeply disturbing and frankly personally unpleasant. I mean, you'd meet old men who the priests would be telling, you know, their son had died in some tragic circumstances, and the priests would be droning on about bad death and the fruits of karma and so on. And I found this personally unattractive.
Is it fair for me to ask you what your beliefs are about a supernatural?
He means God?
Yes.
I don't know. You know, science deals with only those things which you can confirm by observation or by experiment. God doesn't come into that category.
Because to me, the way you understand things is to observe
and deduce from the observations the answer to your questions. But when it comes to the question of why, there is no data, and I don't know of any way to get the data. And so I think it may be, as disappointing as it may seem, beyond our reach.
In short, then, explanation is a function of religion, which I think was maximal in early religions, in tribal societies, and which has decreased or even disappeared in recent times in some societies. So explanation, I'd suggest, is an early function, maybe one of the original functions of religion.
Yes, I mean, like most people who become interested in science, I think inevitably there becomes a conflict in your mind between the religion of Christianity that you've been brought up with and part of you, and the logic of science, and that that has to be resolved. And so that took me slightly longer than some people to resolve it, but I came under fire. I tried to protect my position as a believing Christian as an undergraduate, and came under fire from people who really made me think about it, from the students that I knew, and eventually I decided that they really were incompatible, and so I, as it were, lost my religion, and that's still my current position.
And that's the starting point for the hiddenness argument. It starts with the claim that if God exists, then God is unsurpassably loving or perfectly loving. And we're talking here about the personal idea of an ultimate divine reality. So if God exists, God is perfectly loving. If God is perfectly loving, then anyone who is capable of a relationship with God and not resisting such a relationship will be in a position to participate in relationship with God. To be in such a position, you need to believe that God exists. And so anybody who's capable and non-resistant will believe that God exists. But yet that's not the case. You have plenty of non-resistant non-belief, therefore there's no perfectly loving God, and therefore there's no God. It's a deductive argument. All of the steps are logical steps, which means that you need to deny one of my premises. The conclusions follow logically from their premises.
Do you think that science has disproved religion, as Dawkins argues?
I think it provides some hope of acting more rationally to handle the social and political problems that we have to deal with, both on a personal level and on a worldwide level. I think if you regard religion as a way of perpetuating a way of thought that might otherwise have been lost, I think that's fine.
I think what's more important is to realise that we are individuals. Everything is rooted finally in our brain. My own view is that. Now, if anything exists in a physical sense beyond that, then I myself can't buy into that new physics. But if people believe that, then, and that gives them comfort, then please, who am I to gainsay that?
Because on one hand, I found the God delusion quite liberating, because there was somebody of very high social standing saying that it's okay to be an atheist. You can actually say it without, although in Cambridge, I suppose, it's a perfectly accepted attitude that one can have. But generally in society, especially with an Austrian background, it still feels a bit awkward to say that you're an atheist, which I suppose I am. But you can be proud of it and say that this is actually the rational thing to do. I felt was quite liberating. On the other hand, I also felt that he was overdoing it a bit, because he then went on and said it's not good enough to be an atheist and say that you actually have to fight religion because it's such a bad thing. And I couldn't identify with that. I felt that there are clearly great benefits that some people derive from religion.
I'd say that's about the only mild disagreement that my wife and I have. I say I'm an agnostic, and she says she's an atheist. And she says hers cuts deeper than mine, because an atheist says no God. And I say, I don't know. And she says, I'm admitting that there could be a God. And I'm saying, no, I don't know how the universe started. Period. So, I don't know about the legal, I don't care about the legal. I don't, but...
you don't believe in a personal deity or a life after death, or...
No, I do not. I think,
those of us who are secular, who don't have a religion and an organisation that deals with all these other aspects of our life, simply haven't got round to putting in place all those constructs. And I think over time that will happen. Certainly in the UK, half, if not more than half, of the population are not religious. Who would, if you pointed out to them what humanism stood for, they would say, "Yep, I would subscribe to that." The idea that I want to do good things not because God tells me to or because I'm going to be punished if not, that because I want to, because I want to be, you value humanity itself.
I was puzzled by the fact, but I was told nonsense. Other masters might be perhaps wrong or have something I didn't agree with, but nonsense, no. This was nonsense. And this contrast fascinated me. So I was already, by the age of 11, in some ways you could say, someone who took as his guide Bertrand Russell's work that was accessible to me, beginning with Unpopular Essays.
The response of this particular group to religious fundamentalism is to say, look, religion is really stupid. I want to say it's too strong. I want to say we've got to be careful, it can be divisive. We need to be building bridges, not defending our own tribal turf. Okay? None of us believes in God. But we still have to create a spiritual space, a value space that can stretch across the globe. And I hope we'll reach out and try to do that.
You threw away the fact that you are an atheist. Have you ever been anything otherwise? And at what age did you know you were an atheist?
I think I always was. I had to ask myself, what is God, all the time? What do people mean by God? But I'm deeply respectful, as well as utterly skeptical, of what people say. They have as their spiritual experiences, including what they say about God or gods. I have a preference for polytheism.
As a biologist, I think one of the lived through Darwinism and DNA revolution and so on, and it is now so clear to me that evolution with natural selection and what changes is a perfectly adequate explanation of the diversity of living forms we've got. They clearly all share the same kind of information systems, they clearly the same kind of metabolic systems. So I don't see any need to invoke a God who's active at present. Nor have I had any kind of direct personal experience which I would say was religious. That may be reflection on me rather than anything else, that my mind is shut against it. I don't know. How it was all set up, what created it in the first place, whether there are parallel universities, I don't know. But I mean, summarising it, I'm not a believer.
My main reason for being an atheist is that the concept of God is totally illogical. Any attempt to bring together all the qualities that are ascribed to God lead to contradictions. God, for example, is separate from his creation, but is also infinite and boundless. Contradiction number one. There's the obvious contradiction that people have often talked about, is that he is both omnipotent and all good, and yet allows a world in which terrible and appalling things happen. Whatever way you square it, the concept of God is a logical impossibility, and that's acknowledged in some religions. The notion of the apophatic God, the God of whom it is incorrect to ascribe any positive qualities. So I suppose my atheism is not far from an apophatic God, except it doesn't add the little God bit. And as far as I'm concerned, I can't find house room for a logical contradiction. To keep it open as a placeholder doesn't seem to me to be a useful use of my mind.
I suppose that intellectually I'm an atheist, but humanly, socially, as it were, my dealings with people, I hope, a sort of tolerant agnostic. And as I say, I recognise religious feeling and religious need in others. And I'm drawn to it. I mean, I want to hear about it. I want to hear about why somebody might convert to Catholicism, or why somebody might be drawn to Buddhism, or when I've travelled abroad and been at a loose end on an evening in Japan, and I want to hear about Shintoism. I'm very curious about it and what it means. So the difference really between my intellectual attitude, which is privately atheist, not stridently so, but socially much more agnostic. And of course,
I tend to call myself an atheist rather than agnostic, but that doesn't mean I have doubts. You see, the doubts, I think the words don't quite convey appropriately the differences. I mean, an agnostic tends to be somebody who doesn't know and might take the view that some religions could be right, you see. Now, I don't take the view, I certainly would think it's highly unlikely that any existing religion in the sense of the stories that go along with it, you see, in particular with Christian religion being the Christ having a particular role in this. Whereas it doesn't mean that God in a more metaphorical sense couldn't exist. I mean, I don't like to use the term, and I tend to avoid using the word God anyway, because I think it carries too much baggage with it. One has all sorts of ideas. Maybe you could pray to this entity and things like this, which don't seem to me to be necessarily.
Well, if I wasn't thinking about it, I would say I was an atheist. But of course, it is true that actually it's not all that clear what it means to say you're an atheist. And if you do think about it very carefully, you might say, well, probably the more intellectually prudent answer is to say I'm an extremely robustly agnostic. I'm sort of quite Humean, really, about the matter, I think. I mean, I think if you think about it, it doesn't really make any sense. And, it's... I'm very interested in my sort of vanishing historical capacity. I mean, I'm very interested in how religious belief works and what it's meant. I mean, I take it very, very seriously, but it's not my belief. And it's not really a belief I could conceive of sharing, I think. I mean, I just have to remove almost the entire structure through which I believe things, if I were to do so.
And as a scientist and as a scholar, I am completely confident. I don't find that there's anything added by the postulate of a God at the beginning of the universe or as the designer of consciousness. Either it doesn't make any difference. If God created the Big Bang, well, then that's actually not added anything to simply the statement that the Big Bang happened, because there's no other attributes which we're attributing to God, unless you want to go beyond that and say that the very God who created the universe then went on to send down his Son to live and die amongst us and to bring us into the path of the New Testament and so on. That's a very different kind of God, and I suspect that even you who tend towards some sort of theism don't want to believe in that kind of God.
You know, I've asked you 2 or 3 times, you think you're playing God. I mean, do you believe in God?
No. I believe the universe is far more wonderful than just assuming it was made by some higher power.
Because if you think you already have the absolute truth, whether scientific or moral, then, and it's given to you by God, then you have a problem. You can no longer learn. Absolute truth is immutable. And that is the most tragic thing of all I think about the predations that all of the world's religions have tended to visit upon the human race. In order to buy a needed authority, they bought too much, and it's self-defeating. If you are infallible, if your laws are already perfect, then you can't possibly learn anything more from experience. And that is a tragedy, because any creature that stops learning dies.
And of course, I fully agree with you, and I think with most of my fellow scientists, there can be, there is a complete dissociation between the dogma and belief and the way we scientists approach the search for truth. And so obviously, as a scientist and having been brought up as a Catholic, I could not simply continue accepting the teaching of the Church. I think science is just moving back the frontiers of mystery, the limits of mystery. We are explaining a number of things that used to be considered, that were not explained before, or were attributed to the working of some immaterial entity, be it God or the vital spirit or whatever. And just as Benjamin Franklin showed thunder not to be God's quarreling, but electrostatic phenomenon, just in the same way, in the living sciences, we demonstrated that what was actually explainable or due to to some vital spirit could be explained in terms of physics and chemistry.
I acknowledge completely that there is a mystery. There is, of course, a deep mystery, and we fool ourselves completely if we think that there is not. And I also feel that mystery is less apparent to people, and this may be wrong, of course it can be complete rubbish, but I feel that the mystery is less apparent to man in the 21st century, at least in the Western world, than once it was. And I think that is a great pity. So now I'm sort of tiptoeing around the question of religion. I don't subscribe to a particular religion. I don't.
I am a dyed-in-the-wool faith head, which, using Richard Dawkins' evocative phrase, dyed-in-the-wool faith head. But the wool in my head was thoroughly and completely bleached in my first semester in college by a wonderful course in Anglo-Saxon philosophic analysis. I got a D+, and the course changed my life. I'm just past my 60th birthday, and I have not had a flicker of faith since then.
No. However, whatever happened to this whole notion that we're higher beings who are put on the earth for a greater purpose, and that we're in fact at the top of the evolutionary ladder?
Defined by whom? If I were a bacteria, I would be quite satisfied that I was dominating the planet, because I'd been here for 3.5 billion years. There's more of me than there is of you. There's no way you can nuke me into oblivion, though you humans can nuke yourselves. And I'll be here until the sun explodes and you won't. So now the only difference is that as a bacterium, I wouldn't have the consciousness to imagine that, but I don't know why consciousness should be seen as any higher state of being, especially since if you use the evolutionists' primary criterion of success measured by temporal duration, I wouldn't place any bets on consciousness assuring our long survival on this planet. It's just something that happened. It's a very interesting something, and it is a level of neurological complexity that no other species has reached, and that's fascinating, but it's no goal of evolution, it's no guarantee, it's nothing predictable, and it would probably not occur again if you could replay life's tape from identical starting points.
In many other examples of cases where there's a belief which committing to ourselves means staking your life, like flying on a plane to France tomorrow, that's you're committing your life to something, or taking a drug, you're staking your life on something. And these are precisely not cases where we should make a leap in the absence of evidence. These are the cases where we demand evidence most strongly. And it seems to me that religious belief, if it is genuine, is a case where that demand is actually raised, is the same, but raised to an even higher degree.
It's difficult to reconcile some of these ideas with the classical
Roman Catholic doctrine of a freely independent actor. Right? I mean, this relates to the question we haven't talked about, to the question of free will and volition. But neuroscience, of course, like all of science, throws some doubts on that, some cold water on the idea that I can really truly act like the unmoved mover, the uncaused cause, right? Because how would that be? If I can truly act independent, that means that there's something happens without there being any something happening before. And how is that supposed to work in real life? So those are issues I'm profoundly and passionately interested in to reconcile, to come to a single understanding of everything in the universe, including things outside the universe.
I think you have to be rather more careful in the debate about science and religion than some people have been in the past. Well, I mean, I certainly know a lot of scientists in my field who are believers, and I accept that. I don't happen to be one myself, but maybe that's more a matter of my my family background than that there's any more that than that there's any fundamental difficulty about reconciling the two. I think that the growth of understanding of the world through science weakens some of the motivation which makes people believers, but that's not the same thing as saying that they're incompatible.